Okay, now let's change it up from what I've normally done, and rather than just showing you what I've done, I'll show you how I've done it this time. As I've mentioned a couple of times, a lot of people are asking about this wind deflector and how I made it. It's cardboard aided design, good old CAD, but my version of. When you use cardboard, it works very similar to metal in a lot of ways. You can't put a curve this way and a curve that way in a piece of cardboard because it will crease. So the cardboard will show you what the metal wants to do when you want to pull it round here. Because this is a single plane curve, you can do this over your knee. This is really easy. That again is a single plane curve in here. You can bend it over your knee. So forming that part of the shape is really easy. But you then got to hold it down somehow and hold it on. And if you look, I'll show you in a little while when we're doing the other one, there's a 20mm wide flange around the outside here. As you can see, this comes down at an angle, that's sitting flat. I can't just put a bolt through here because otherwise it's going to pull that down, it's going to look horrible. So I've got to flatten just a flange out around this edge so that this can come down and intersect with there properly, and I can put a bolt through it and it won't crease. If I point over to this side a little bit, hopefully you can see as we come round the corner, the angle between here and here gets less and less and less until ultimately it's running parallel to it. So we don't need much of a flange around there. But on the steepest parts up here, that's when we've got to do the most forming. So using a piece of card to get your shape right, it's cheap, it's quick, it's easy. You can stand back, you can paint it if you want to, and then stand back 20 foot and see if you like the look of it. You can invite all your mates around to come and say, what do they think of it? Do you think it should be changed? But it allows you to try different things. I went for this asymmetric size or style where this side is bigger and deeper than that side. That's because I'm old and I like 1930s race cars, and I used to do that a lot. Because this is going to be for motor racing most of the time, it's going to have one person in it most of the time. So it doesn't need as much wind protection over here as it does over here. I could have gone to Tigers and bought their pre-made GRP stroke carbon fibre wind deflector. But because I've had to move the steering up by 2.5 to 3 inches to get my legs underneath it, it wasn't high enough. And it would have stopped at this height. So this is the reasoning behind me having to make my own one and make it this size. So what we're going to do, now you've seen the cardboard section, I'm not going to remake the whole thing, but I'll show you the techniques I've used for forming the shape around the outside, and then we can refer back to the other one and you can see how it was done. Okay, so now we've moved into the fabrication workshop on the side, and we'll have a look at the, oh, I've got the microphone's working. We'll have a look at how we actually form the aluminium panel for the wind deflector. If I show you the underneath, you can see it's only a standard piece of aluminium, there's nothing fancy. From this side you can see the size of the return flange, and you can also, if I show you this bit here, see that it fades away to nothing just here. If I come around on this side as well, for exactly the same reason, it fades away to nothing here. Because as it's sitting on the car at this angle, as it comes around the side of the scuttle, they become the same angle, so it doesn't need this flange. Right, if I get a bit of cardboard and rest it on top, just to show that I'm not bullshitting you, there you go. It's the same shape, I made that from that. So the cardboard is step one. You can lay that straight on your flat sheet of aluminium and cut round it. It's literally that simple. And that will give you the outline shape you need. From here, there's a few more little crafty bits you need to get involved with. You can bend this shape over your knee. Don't try and use the corner of a bench, otherwise you'll get ridges. Use something nice and soft like your leg or your knee or something, and slowly start to form the middle bend first, so that it sits down in the middle of that main dash former. Then you can slowly start to form these round. You're going to be doing this in about 5 or 6 stages, so don't try and get too perfect with the first bit. Because once you've got your shape on here, and you start to form this flange, it will change this curvature as well a little bit. So don't be too pedantic on the first little bit. Don't drill any holes in anything yet, just leave it plain aluminium. If you can give yourself a little guide mark, if you can rest this back on the car and on the main former, and just mark a little line where the front edge is and the front edges. And also mark yourself a centre line, so that each time you take it off, bend it a bit more and put it back on again, you know where to aim. Because if you don't mark those, if you move it a little bit each time, you'll keep bending and have to keep reshaping it. Okay, so what we're going to do now, I'm not going to try and form another whole wing deflector because I only need one, but I can use a piece of aluminium offcut just to show you how I've done the basics, and the rest of it is just more of the same. So what I've done is used my cardboard template, and I've cut the same shape out of a piece of 1.6mm aluminium. Now, I'm going to add a little bit of health and safety in here. I'm not usually a great advocate of it, but from very uncomfortable mistakes in the past, when you're cutting out pieces of aluminium, pieces of any metal, put a pair of gloves on and get a file after you've cut it and file all those nasty little burrs and splinters off the edge, because they hurt. They really are uncomfortable. So take the couple of minutes, don't get too impatient, and just clean up the cut edge. You'll find you can cut it with a jigsaw, you can cut it with tin snips, you can cut it with a nibbler, whatever you like. The one thing I'm a bit wary of with tin snips, as you're cutting, as you get to the end of the blade, it leaves little ridges all the way around at the end of every cut. So if you can use a saw of some sort rather than snips, you'll have a bit less to do to clean up along that edge. It's not the end of the world, just needs a little tap down flat again, but it's one of the things that if you can find a way of doing it without snips, you'll save yourself a little bit of time. So you can see now, I've done about half of it, this piece here. So if we now, if you can spin round just a little bit for me. So it's 1.6mm alley, stick it over your leg. Don't try and do all the fold in one go. Work your way backwards and forwards. And in a couple of seconds, that's all it takes. You'll find it a bit easier doing the middle fold going the other way than I will at the moment, because you'll have all the rest of it to work with. But if you do find you need to do a fold on an edge like that, again, don't try and use the edge of the bench because you'll get ridges in it. But what you can do is stand it on here and use your thumbs and push down. That way you get a nice gentle radius in there without too many creases if you take your time. So we'll have a little bit more curvature in the top edge. And you can see we're now fairly similar to what's there. Right, so the next thing we need to do is work out how wide this flange needs to be. I've used little M6 bolts to hold this down. So I found the flange itself is ideal. There you go, 18mm wide. Nice part about these little calipers, there's a little locking wheel on the back. And if you lock that tight, you can then use the jaws to scratch you a lovely even line. All the way around. Hopefully that's just about showing up on camera. Let's give it another little go, just to make it a little bit deeper. Okay. Anyway, if I move it around a bit, hopefully you'll be able to see roughly how wide I've gone on there. So we've now got to start forming that from this angle up here. One of the things it's going to do as we try and fold this bit up, it's got to try and actually shrink the metal a little bit along this edge as it's coming round. No, sorry, it's not. It's shrinking in here. It's stretching as we're coming along here. I don't want to lead you astray. So on this return, it will shrink. On this return, because of the metal's moving that way, it needs to get bigger. Now at a push, you can use these wide-jawed mole grips to form on the line and slowly start to form it up. So you can see the principle there, but I'll show you another way that I've done it because I've got a little bit more machinery. You probably won't have it, but at least it's nice to know how. Right, this little bit of kit here is called a swage roller or a Jenny roller, depending on whereabouts you are in the world. It's designed primarily for rolling different shapes into the edge of panels. But because this upper wheel has got a square corner on it, I can use that to start the crease all the way along my line and get a nice even line with it and do away with these little wobbly bits I'm getting when I was using the mole grips. So the idea being is it goes in there, it clamps down there, and you lift the panel up as you're winding it through. Now there's a little depth stop at the back here, which I'm using to make sure it stays the same distance from the edge of the panel all the way. Now a lot of you American guys will have motorised versions of these. Yeah, I wish I had one as well, but hey ho, this is what I've got, this is what I'm going to use. Right, so if I stop there and come back out, you can see now we've started to form the crease really nicely along here without all those edges, all those little wrinkles. So I'm going to carry on and come round to about here, because this is where our flange needs to stop and come in parallel. Right, okay. So now you can see what it's started to do. So if I come here, you can now see what it's started to do. It's starting to shape the edge up. Now the other thing, and an added benefit that you won't appreciate because you're not in the workshop here with me, is how much stiffer it's made this. And that really has now been rather than being a springy old bit of aluminium, that's now become quite rigid. So our next step from here is to go back, pop it on the car, and then start finessing this little ridge. Okay, so now we're back out with the car again, and this is first fit. So don't expect perfection too early on, work up towards it. Now you can see I've marked my little lines, as I was saying previously, on the car, so every time I put it back on here, I come back to exactly the same place again, otherwise it gets really confusing. Now you can see I've got a gap underneath here, and it's touching here. So I've obviously got far too much bend here, and not enough there. So we can start to just gently tweak it with fingers until it starts to come in a little bit closer. And we need more curve in this bit here. And a lot more curve on this edge. Right, the other thing it's showing me is that just here where it's touching, that flange needs to bend up some more. So I'm going to go and get a pair of pliers again, and I'm slowly going to start to form that up a bit more. Right, so I'm going to go back to using the wide jaw mole grips. And we're going to come in just here and slowly start to form it round a little bit more. Here we go. This is looking nice and parallel between here and here, but here still needs quite a lot more in it. Okay, now it's looking better. Still got a tiny little bit more here I want to put in, and then we'll add a bit more curvature generally through here. Right. I'll have to stick this down over my knee again, so bear with me a second. Right, there we go. Now you can see we're actually getting quite close here now. That's fitting there, that's fitting there. I'm going to put some more in here. It's coming along, still need some more just here. Yeah, keep going. Yeah, see, we're starting to bring this edge down now, and you can see the last place it's touching is here. That's where we need to start introducing, keep pulling the bend in there. This is where the alignment marks really come into their own, so I know I'm going back in the same place. Every time we're getting a bit closer and a bit closer. Yep, and we're down to about here now, so we're definitely making progress. Okay, yeah, everyone's moving down a bit more. Now we're down to here. Right. As you can see, it's not rocket science. It's just patience, keep looking, use your alignment points all the time, use your alignment points. So from here, we've now got to start really getting this groove in the right place. We're going to use a little piece of pointed wood and a hammer, but before we do that, we're going to have to protect the top of the gel coat. Otherwise, this edge will dig in and it'll form lots of scratches. So I'll protect this up and then I'll show you the next bit. Right, so the next thing we need to do is to make this a nice, neat, refined line. If we just try doing it with a hammer, we're going to end up with bruises on the metalwork all the way around. Because the hammer head is round, it's not going to go in there properly. So what we're going to use is a piece of wood. It's only a piece of old firewood cut to a point. But because it's soft enough and narrow enough, it can sit in that groove. We've protected the GRP with this piece of card, and I've transferred my measurements from the bits of tape that were on there onto the card as well. So I know I've still got the position right. Now what I can do now is put that in there. I now know that I'm forming this flange to exactly that shape, because that's what it's sitting on, that's what's supporting the edge. So I'm going to work my way all the way across. Now if you look just here, can you see it's lifted the edge up? Because it's actually formed the shape a lot better. We've now got this line sitting down properly onto the fiberglass, and it's lifted that edge up. So what we can do now is use the side of it and tap it down on there. Now if I push down on here, can you see how nicely now that fits all the way around there? Around this corner here, I'm going to try and tap this in a little bit more now. And you can just see the shape is forming really nicely around there. I'm not going to spend hours trying to get this one perfect. I'm trying to show you the technique rather than the finished one. You can see the finished one. I'll bolt that back on again in a minute. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. Piece of softwood, piece of hardwood's actually a bit better, but softwood will do perfectly happily. Before we can get the absolutely final shape, we're going to need to start fixing this down. Otherwise, every time you tap, it moves. As you can see, it's still got a little bit of spring to it. So we're going to need to start making some fixing holes through it and anchor it in, I don't know, 4 or 5 places to hold it still, so that when we do our final forming, it comes to the actual shape we need. Right, so next process, as we just said, was to make the holes. Plot out where your holes are going to be before you do anything else. Work out what size screws you're going to use, how many you're going to need, start from the end and then plot them out distance-wise all the way around and plot the whole piece out with all the measurements. If you don't get them equal all the way around, somebody will come up to you at show and say, oh, look, they're not very even, are they? So take your time, do that bit really carefully and get them even so that there is no room for anybody else to criticise. If you're a bit OCD like me, you can't do it any other way. You have to make them even, otherwise you can't live with it. So what we're going to use to make the holes is these things. It's called a joddle and punch. It's in 2 pieces. Let me just make that come down here. This side is a hole punch. This side is a thing called a joddle. I don't know if you can just about see if I put my finger behind it. There's a little step in there. And its function is if you want to put a new lower piece on a door skin or something like that, it'll actually punch or fold a little step in the panel so you can overlap one panel over the other. But we're not using that today, we're just going to use the hole punch. And it's a very clever little tool because that top section spins round like that, so it can be either one. but we're using just the hole punch. When I've got my hole positions, pop it on the edge. It's got its own built-in depth stop, so it puts all the holes in exactly the same place, in from the edge of the panel. No drilling, no messing, just a really nice, neat little hole. Not big money either. Very worthwhile investment if you're going to do a fair bit of this, because it just makes lovely, neat holes. There's no burr on the back. If you drilled the holes, you knew you're going to get a burr on the back, and you have to spend all the time deburring it afterwards. So that's our fixing holes. If you line your marks up again now, you can mark through your fixing holes. Into the top of the panel, and you know where you've got to drill your holes in your panel. I like to use things called riv nuts or threaded inserts. You can hold this on with self-tappers, nuts and bolts, anything you fancy doing. The reason I like riv nuts is I can put them in and out 20 times, quickly and easily. And if I manage to mess the thread up on one of them, I can drill it out and I can put another one in. If I use self-tappers, once I've screwed that on once, if I pull the thread, my only option then is to go for a bigger self-tapper. Then I have to change all of them so they all match. So these threaded inserts, they take a little bit of getting used to. They're not technically difficult. It's just the amount of time it takes to put them in, countersink them nice and flush, and get used to using them. I won't go into too much detail on those at the moment. We can cover those later. So you can see everything now, when it's pulled down, is all going to pull in nice and tight. Okay, so in true Blue Peter fashion, here's one we made earlier. You've already seen it, obviously, but you can see now the direct comparison between what we've got here and the shape I just made in the aluminium. The only difference, this one's had the self-adhesive carbon fibre wrap put over the top to make it better than just a bare sheet of aluminium. It's not rocket science, it's patience, some basic hand tools, getting the idea in the first place, and then taking your time. Don't forget to protect the fiberglass when you're working with it, because once you've scratched it, you know, unless you're going to paint it, and there's a different matter. So I hope you've enjoyed what we've done and you've learned something from it. If you haven't, okay, awfully sorry. We'll try better next time. But you can see now how I've made this one, and I think we'll wrap that one up for this episode and say, okay, hope to see you again next time. Cheers now.